serving as a cleaner in a five-star hotel. The widow was paralyzed when she realized the billionaire guest was her late husband, who had passed away 9 years earlier. The days Harper Caldwell lived had become a series of dull routines that blended into each other as she got closer. There was minimal chance of shocks because she was absolutely happy with her existence. 9 years had passed since Nathaniel's death in the plane accident, leaving her to raise their daughter on her alone. Since then, she had found an almost complete serenity in predictability, but it was a shaky peace. Every morning, she made breakfast for herself and her daughter before leaving for her job as a maid at the Riverside Hotel. The Riverside, one of Charleston's most well-known hotels, was a sanctuary where the powerful and affluent could dwell in luxury. Harper considered it merely a job. She would spend her days making sure everything sparkled flawlessly, fluffing pillows and scrubbing rooms. It was nothing special, but it helped her pay the bills and financed Lila's schooling. What mattered most was everything. One evening, Harper was assigned to clean a suite on the top floor. She wasn't the only one who came. This was a room for VIPs, the kind of people that offered her large tips, but showed her very little interest. When she emerged from the elevator, she noticed a few staff members whispering at the door with a mix of curiosity and excitement on their faces. Harper disregarded them, pushing her cart down the hall while mentally reviewing her to-do list. She had not heard the voice in nearly a decade, but it was hers, and she would never forget it as she prepared to enter the room. Her heart skipped a beat, and her palm froze, hovering above the door handle. It couldn't be, therefore she must have misheard, but then she heard it again, clearly and loudly, coming from inside the suite. She carefully pulled the door wide, her heart hammering in Nathaniel Harper's chest. Peeping inside, she barely noticed the massive suite with its spectacular view of Charleston Harbor from floor to ceiling windows. She looked at the man standing at the window, his back to her. He sounded as composed and cool as she remembered when he was on the phone. Harper had to brace herself against the door frame as her feet felt shaky. The one was Nathaniel. More than anything, though, she had wept for him, buried him in her heart, and learned to exist without him based on the way he stood and spoke. Seeing him there, alive, was terrible. She felt like running in to ask him questions, but she couldn't move. She just stood there watching him, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Nathan. He didn't catch the scarcely imperceptible murmur she uttered. He hung up, pocketed his phone, turned to face the other direction, and took a quick look around the room. Harper thought everything would fall apart, and their eyes would meet when he spotted her. But he didn't. He reached for a newspaper on the other side of the coffee table, oblivious to her presence. Harper stepped back and closed the door as gently as she could. Her mind was racing as she leaned against the wall. She couldn't have been at the memorial and seen the wreckage. The announcement of Nathaniel's death had been clear. Then why did he appear so vibrant in this hotel suite? She attempted to calm herself by inhaling deeply, but it was unsuccessful. The questions kept pouring up and she had no answers. She knew she had to go home and process what she had just seen, but her feet would not move. She had a strong desire to confront him, grab hold of him, and inquire about his whereabouts for the previous 2 decades. But there was another part of her that was scared that if she faced him, the reality would shatter whatever last shred of hope she might have had. Though Harper's thoughts continued to race, she forced herself to turn and return down the hallway. She needed to be graceful about this. If Nathaniel was still alive, there had to be a reason he hadn't come back to her and Lila. Her panic couldn't stop her from learning the truth about what was happening. She went back to the staff room and could barely concentrate. Going through the identical routines of checking out and gathering her stuff felt weird, like she was seeing herself from a distance. She hardly remembered driving home, but when she did, she was sitting in her small kitchen, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Since her daughter Lila was spending the night at a friend's house, at least she had the night to herself. Harper sat there and relived the moment in her head. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see Nathaniel's face and hear his voice, if he was still alive, but it all made no sense. Why hadn't he come back, and what had happened to him? And why was he in Charleston at the Riverside, as though he had no past? She knew she couldn't keep this to herself, But she also knew she couldn't go up to Nathaniel and start questioning him. Not yet, she thought, needing to be sure she had more information. She would find out everything she could about Nathaniel's life now, even if it meant adopting the guise of just another hotel employee. Even though it would destroy her once more, she had to know the truth, even if it meant remaining unnoticed and invisible. As Harper sipped her tea, her hands steadied and her resolve strengthened. The next day, she would go back to work and start gathering the information she needed. For the first time in years, she experienced something other than grief. Yes, there was dread, but it was also hope, a dwindling hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely lost. The following morning, when Harper first arrived at the Riverside Hotel, she experienced a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her hands shook as she straightened her clothes, but she forced herself to concentrate on today after taking a deep breath. She had to remain calm no matter what happened. If Nathaniel was here, she had to figure out how to approach him without drawing attention to herself. As she moved through the lobby, she heard brief talks between visitors and personnel. Clearly, there was a buzz. Someone mysterious had arrived the night before, and everyone was trying to figure out who he was. Harper listened carefully, but nobody mentioned his name. It seemed as if he had just materialized out of nowhere. Cast in shadows, she wondered how long he would stay, and, more importantly, how much longer she had to find out. She picked up her cleaning cart and made her way to the top floor. Even though her shift hadn't officially assigned her to Nathaniel's suite that day, she hoped to find an excuse to be near it. If she was lucky, she might be able to see him again and hear him talk. Anything that could account for his survival and seeming lack of knowledge about his history. Harper's heart skipped a beat when she reached the top floor. The door to Nathaniel's apartment was locked, but she could hear some quiet whispers going on within. She knew his voice right away and was forced to scoot closer as she struggled to understand what he was saying. Harper could hear a woman's voice too, but her words escaped her. Even though she professed to need to clean, something prevented her from knocking. She tried to blend in, busily tidying the corridor rather than draw attention to herself. As the door opened while she was working, the woman came out of the suite. She was tall, fashionable, and well-groomed. She was definitely not a member of the hotel staff. Harper glanced down as though she were trying to focus on something on the ground, but her gaze kept wandering. The woman turned and peered around gravely, then walked quickly down the hall. Wondering why she was in Nathaniel's room and who she was, Harper's mind raced. Shortly afterward, the door opened again and Nathaniel came out. Harper started to run out of breath. He looked just as she remembered, soaring with the same confident, carefree grace that had always mesmerized others. But there was something different, too, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. He moved in a detached, almost robotic manner. Harper noticed Nathaniel passing her without even looking, and she felt a tinge of hurt. It hurt more than she could have expected to see him both so close, and yet so far away, even if she hadn't counted on seeing him again. As he turned the corner, she wondered what had become of him, and if he was the same man she had loved. When she finished her work on the top floor, she moved to the next suite, but her mind was not on her. All she could think about was Nathaniel and how she could get closer to him without revealing her true identity. Even though she felt compelled to follow him, seize his arm, and make him remember her, she realized she needed to be cautious and not take any chances if there was more to this story. That evening, Harper sat in the staff break room holding onto a cup of coffee. She refused to take a sip. She heard someone mention the VIP guest, but she had only been listening to half of the talk going on in the room. She leaned forward and her ears perked up as she feigned to straighten her clothes. "But nobody really knows why he is here," one of the housekeepers murmured, lowering her voice. "I hear he's some kind of big shot from New York. It's all extremely private." "Indeed. That's also what I was told." Another person responded. "But hold on, he's already reserved. For the next 2 weeks, there must be some kind of business trip or event taking place in the room." Harper had a frenzied mind for 2 weeks. It wasn't much time, yet it was enough. She was given a fortnight to find out more about this new Nathaniel and why he hadn't answered her calls. The series went on for a few days. Harper continued to work her regular shifts and kept a close check on any news that might pertain to Nathaniel. She memorized his routine when he left his room. When he returned and visited her, she learned that he hardly ever left the hotel, preferring to hold meetings in his room or eat supper by himself. Every time she caught a glimpse of him, her heart ached even more. During the afternoon, Harper managed to break into his suite while he was out. She had 1,000 excuses ready in case she was caught. She may say she was checking the minibar or changing the towels, but the suite was empty, and she took a moment to take in her surroundings. It seemed strange to be in his vicinity again, but she needed an answer. She scanned the room intently, searching for any clues that would point to his new existence. She noticed a notebook partially hidden by other papers on top of a stack of papers on the desk. Most of them were business contracts. Harper took it and turned the pages after a moment. It had notes, agendas for meetings, and phone numbers, but what truly caught her eye was a small piece of folded paper tucked inside the back flap. She unfolded it, her hands trembling. Although worn and damaged, the photo appeared to have been there for a long time. Harper let out a gasp upon realizing the image. It was a picture from the day she and Nathaniel got married. Standing on a beach, laughing, their arms wrapped around one another. The image was proof that the man she had loved was still alive and somewhere, even if she had no idea how it got here. Tears filled her eyes as she carefully folded the photo and replaced it in the journal. She wanted to take it and hold it close to remember what they had once shared, even though she knew that wasn't an option. Instead, she placed the notebook exactly where she had found it in an attempt to conceal any signs of her presence. When she exited the suite, Harper felt a surge of determination. While he may not have remembered her, she was sure a part of him did. Even if he didn't realize it, she just had to get beyond whatever wall had been built around his memories. Whatever it took, she was going to get him back. Over the next several days, Harper's life turned into a tightrope walk. Thoughts of Nathaniel consumed her as she went about her everyday activities at the hotel. In an attempt to piece together any information that would help her understand how he could still be alive and why he hadn't returned, she went over every exchange they had and every time she saw him. It was exhausting, but she had to keep up her act of normalcy. No one could possibly be aware of her whereabouts. One morning, Harper arrived early for her shift, curious to find out what Nathaniel had planned. She knew he had a meeting in his suite later, so she was going to be near him. While she was setting up her cleaning supplies, she heard two of the concierge staff members conversing near the front desk. "What is Mr. Brooks's current situation?" One of them grinned and said. Harper perked up at the mention of his name. "It appears that he will be dining in private tonight with a select group of celebrities." "Indeed. It sounds like an agreement for business. They have been very quiet about that," the other individual responded. "He's only been here a few days, yet already he seems to be running the whole show." Harper's heartbeat quickened. She might have a chance to inquire a little more, as he would be preoccupied for a while with a private dinner. She was interested in learning more about Nathaniel's circumstances at the moment and the lifestyle he had chosen. Harper went about her usual business of cleaning rooms, checking her watch, and keeping track of the hours till Nathaniel's meeting because she was determined to be at the right location at the right time. The day felt like it went on forever. If she could only learn a little more, perhaps she might start to unravel the mystery surrounding his disappearance. Until the time finally arrived. Harper positioned herself on the top floor and claimed to be busy cleaning the corridor outside Nathaniel's suite. As she worked, she kept an eye on the door, waiting for him to leave. It astonished her to hear voices coming from inside. The door opened and she slipped around a corner to see Nathaniel and a strange man come out. The man talked in a low voice that Harper could only make out fragments of as they passed where she was hiding, unable to afford any mistakes. This transaction must close without hiccups. The man had an abrupt tone of voice. "We hope very much that no one will start asking questions." Nathaniel nodded, his expression enigmatic. "I am aware that everything is on schedule," he responded. He spoke in a calm, composed manner. Harper recognized the voice, yet something about its coolness made her skin prickle. As the men walked out, Harper's mind raced. What kind of agreement were they talking about and why? She felt something was going on that Nathaniel wouldn't reveal. until they were out of sight. Harper slipped into Nathaniel's suite. Even though she knew there was a risk, she needed more information. Her eyes swept around the space, taking in the neatly arranged documents on the desk and the unlocked briefcase lying on the floor. Her attention was drawn to a small black book that was placed next to a laptop. She hesitated for a second, then reached out and snatched it, flipping the pages. For her, the majority of the book's entries, dates, and contact names held little significance. But when she glanced through the list, a few names immediately caught her attention, individuals she was familiar with from personal experience, names of people who had known Nathaniel for a long time prior to the accident, people who had helped with the memorial service. Her heart raced at the thought that some of these people were now on her list of business connections. Why do they now employ Nathaniel? After everything that had happened? She is not required to know. She kept turning the pages, stopping when she saw a note written in the margins of one, "Keep Harper out of this." Harper felt a knot in her stomach. Someone had scrawled her name. Thus, it was evident that someone was trying to hide something from her, but was it Nathaniel? After reading what she had just read, her thoughts were disturbed by the sound of footsteps approaching the door. Harper quickly put the book back where it belonged, smoothing the cover to make sure nothing was damaged. She glanced around in an attempt to locate a place to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The only thing she could do was act natural. As soon as the door opened, Harper picked up a cleaning rag and began wiping the nearest surface, acting as though she had been there the entire time. Nathaniel opened the door but stopped short when he saw her. For the brief moment that their eyes met, Harper saw a flicker of familiarity in his gaze, but it disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "Is there any way I can help you?" The distant Harper was trying not to panic when Nathaniel asked in a kind way, but her heart was pounding. "I had no clue someone would come back so quickly." She faked a smile and apologized, saying, "I was just cleaning up, sir." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment before nodding. "It's okay." He looked down to check his phone and replied, "Just make sure everything is spotless." Harper took advantage of the opportunity and snuck out of the room, shaking hands as she closed the door behind her. Despite experiencing emotional distress, she managed to return unnoticed to the service elevator. It was obvious now that someone had deliberately kept her from knowing the truth, and they were still trying. But why? Again, in the rest area, Harper tried to make sense of everything she had learned. She thought about the memo, the business relationships, and the enigmatic conversation she had overheard. Everything here pointed to one thing. Nathaniel's role in this conspiracy was significantly more than she had realized. He was either participating in it or a tool. The idea that Nathaniel was being tricked broke her heart. Though he was not the man she had seen today, she wanted to believe that Lila would never choose to be apart from her. It was as if someone had forced him to forget who he was. He seemed more subdued and in command. Harper knew she had to press on. If there was any chance of getting through to Nathaniel, she had more digging to do. She needed to find out who was following her, why they had caused Nathaniel to disappear and everything. But more than anything, she needed to find a way to remind him before it was too late. Harper awakened the next morning feeling even more pressed for time. Even with the previous day's revelations validating her suspicions, she was still a long way from grasping the full extent of the situation. She had even noticed a hint of recognition when Nathaniel spoke to him. Nevertheless, it was not enough. She was going to the riverfront to get the answers she really wanted. Everything was as it always had been. Visitors flowed in and out in an air of subdued luxury as staff quietly meandered along the corridors. But Harper could feel a storm brewing beneath the surface. Every time she saw Nathaniel's suite, she was overcome with worry and hope, at the same time worry that she was getting herself into too much trouble, and hope that she would be able to save the man she loved. It was Harper's turn to shine that afternoon. She had heard from the front desk that Nathaniel was scheduled to attend a meeting in one of the conference rooms below, so his suite would be empty. Even though she knew it was dangerous, she couldn't resist looking into it more. Her heart pounding, she crept inside his room only after being sure that everything was clear. The suite was as spotless as she had left it the day before. Harper looked around the room, trying to find anything that would explain Nathaniel's current predicament. She glanced at a laptop that was still open on the desk, showing a number of recent emails. She paused, then quickly drew closer as she swiftly skimmed the messages. Even though the majority of the emails were business-related and contained discussions about contracts, transactions, and investments, one particular one stood out from the rest. Harper's stomach ached as she clicked on the link to see the latest information about Project Brooks. The message was vague and short, but it talked about keeping asset control and avoiding unnecessary difficulties. The signature belonged to an unknown person to her. Anderson. Harper went insane. Did Project Brooks suggest that Nathaniel was involved in some kind of commercial plan? As she read the words, she struggled to understand them and became more perplexed. Nothing about this made sense, and she was starting to feel like she was in over her head. As she read through the email, she discovered an attachment, a list of scanned documents. After shaking her hand, Harper unfolded the file to reveal a pile of court records. As she read the passage, her eyes widened. These documents appeared to give control of Nathaniel's assets to a trust managed by his family. They were dated just a few weeks after his alleged death. With those cold, calculated remarks, all control over his fortune was taken away, and it was transferred to other members of the Brooks family. It was clear now that Nathaniel had not been unintentionally absent, but had been on purpose. To make sure he was taken out of the picture, someone went to great lengths. But who and why? The sound of a door opening broke Harper's reverie. She spun around her heart and dove into her neck. For a moment, Nathaniel just stood there, staring into her eyes without saying anything. Both of them said nothing. Like a deer caught in headlights, Harper did not know whether to run or stay put. "Why are you here?" Daniel wondered at his tone. Harper gulped hard and searched for a way to explain herself without warmth. "I'm sorry, mister. My main worry was ensuring sure there was nothing that needed to be cleaned." She said something in an attempt to sound casual, but Nathaniel's eyes never left him. "You've spent a lot of time in and out of my suite." He claimed that lately his voice was measured. "Is there a missing component?" "I'm not getting it from you." Harper's eyes widened. She had to be careful since one slip-up could make everything crumble. In return, she forced a smile. "No, master. I'm simply going about my day. But if there's anything specific you need, I'd be pleased to help." Harper thought she saw a glint of the man she knew before Nathaniel's expression softened a little and then disappeared, leaving the same cold, distant exterior. "I don't need anything." "You can go," he said. She looked away. Harper stepped back and, with trembling hands, approached the door. Though she had been so close, it felt like she was drifting further away from understanding what was happening. But when she was leaving the suite, she discovered something that she had not noticed previously. A picture lay on the bedside table, half hidden by a lamp. The picture displayed a happy-looking young woman with her hair blowing in the wind. Harper stopped talking and stared at the photo. She recognized that face. Who was this woman, and was it the same one that she had moments before witnessed leaving Nathaniel's room? And in all of this, how did she fit in? Harper knew she had to continue, even if her mind was filled with questions. She had to go before Nathaniel asked her any more questions. That evening, Harper sat in her small apartment, replaying the day over in her head. The sensation persisted that there was a crucial component missing from the emails, court documents, photo, and other pieces of the puzzle. She felt as if she were putting together a jigsaw puzzle with half of the pieces missing, even though she knew they were all connected. She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Harper made a decision. She couldn't keep going around in circles trying to figure something out. If she truly desired to discover the truth, she would have to have courage. No matter the risk, she was going to have to confront Nathaniel head-on. The next day, Harper returned to the motel with a plan. She knew it would be dangerous, but she had to talk to Nathaniel. She needed to know why Brooks was here, what this project was all about, and why he hadn't responded to her. Above all, though, she wanted to see whether there was anything in him that remembered her and their former relationship. As Harper exited the elevator and reached the top floor, her heart began to accelerate. Though she wasn't sure what to say or how he would react, She was done hiding. She stole herself, took a big breath, and knocked on Nathaniel's flat door. There was a silence. Then the door opened and footsteps sounded, and Nathaniel stood there looking nonsensical. For a while they just kept looking at each other, their silence growing. Then Harper spoke, hardly audible above a whisper. "We have to talk." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed as he briefly fixed them on Harper, who was standing at his door. Harper was afraid he would say no. After a few uncomfortable moments, he stood aside and signaled for her to come in, though she could just shut the door and lock her out completely. Harper stepped past him into the suite and let out a shaky breath, the tension in the room obvious. As she stood in Nathaniel's room, his stare treating her as if she were a stranger, every word she had prepared for this moment seemed to vanish. She'd played out this scene 1,000 times in her head, knowing exactly how she would turn to face him and what she would say. She lifted her gaze to meet his, expecting to see some recognition in his eyes, but all she saw was that same faraway, guarded expression on Lee's face. "I may not fully understand." Harper's voice was a touch wobbly at first. "How on earth are you still alive when you were supposed to be dead?" Nathaniel stiffened his mouth and looked away, as if the question had upset him. To this he replied, "I'm sorry, but I think there was some mistake." "I have no idea what you're talking about." Harper's heart hurt, but she was determined to stick with Nathaniel. "Please, it's me," Harper said to herself, taking one step forward. "We were married, lived together, and had a kid. How come you can't remember any of it?" Something like recognition flickered briefly in Nathaniel's eyes, but it was quickly overwhelmed by confusion. "No, I don't." He shook his head and said, "I don't know who you are. I'm sorry, but I can't remember what you two were talking about." Harper felt as though someone had punched him in the stomach. She'd anticipated being upset at being turned down, but she'd never imagined looking into such a blank, unfathomable face. "Something happened to you, didn't it?" "Your relatives," she whispered. "It was them who made you forget." Nathaniel's eyes snapped back to her, alert and sharp. "This brings our conversation to an end," he responded, his voice growing colder. "You should leave." "No, it's not. And you're telling me you don't even remember me now that I know you're still alive?" Harper lost her cool and said, "I've been mourning you for 9 years, thinking you're dead." "It isn't exactly like that." "Nathaniel, you owe me an explanation." Nathaniel stepped back with a furious expression on his face, and his eyes got darker. "This has to stop," he replied, his tone chilly as he stated, "I don't owe you anything. I don't know who you are or why you've come to this place." Harper refused to let her tears fall, even though they hurt. She was not going to let him push her away now that she was this close to learning the truth. She said, "You loved me once. I know you did remember, and I know that part of you still does, even if you don't want to admit it." Nathaniel hesitated, and Harper could feel the tension inside him. As he opened his mouth to speak, there was a knock on the door. Harper stiffened, unsure about the person. She did not intend for anybody else to be there. Nathaniel grabbed for the door, his expression more reserved. Harper's stomach turned to realize that the woman standing there was the same one she'd spotted leaving his room a few days before. The woman in the photo. Her demeanor was composed and businesslike, but her eyes widened as she gave Harper a quick glance. She was holding a briefcase. "Do I disturb the peace?" she asked in a polite but firm tone as we were ready to conclude. Nathaniel spoke quickly and sent Harper a warning look in return. "Look, what do you need?" Anderson. Harper's blood ran cold. That was a name she knew from the emails. It seemed to be the person in charge of whatever project Brooks was. Although her natural reaction would have been to confront the woman and ask for an explanation, she forced herself to keep her cool. Since she was so close now, she had no choice but to keep her secret. Anderson came in and closed the door, but her smile never wavered. "Who is this woman?" Her gaze flitted from Nathaniel to Harper and back again as she said, "I need to go over some documents with you, but it can wait if you're busy." Harper's heart raced as she waited for Nathaniel to answer. Would he tell Anderson the truth? Could he possibly know what the truth was? Harper was shocked to hear that he merely said, She's just a staff member who got a little too curious. She's not nobody. Harper was hurt by the remarks, but she forced herself to swallow her pride and remain mute. Her cooperation was necessary until she understood. Anderson regarded Nathaniel's explanation for a moment before turning back to him. If that were the case, I would be very appreciative. Please allow us to carry out our business, Anderson said, giving Harper a fierce look. This is an issue of personal concern. Harper's hands balled into fists at her sides. Even though she knew that yelling would not assist her just now, she was nevertheless determined to get Nathaniel to tell her the truth. She nodded and inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay calm. Of course, she said rather quietly. I'll just let you handle it. As she neared the door, she glanced again at Nathaniel, hoping to catch a glimpse of his understanding, but his expression was blank, as if he had completely forgotten she was there. Harper's heart wrenched as the door quietly closed behind her as she went out into the corridor. She stood for a long time, attempting to process what had just happened. Given her involvement in Nathaniel's incident, Anderson was clearly more than just a business associate. She had to be involved in his actions and his incapacity to remember his past. Harper's mind was filled with doubts, but one thing was certain. She would have to go farther if she was going to find the truth. As Harper walked back down the hallway, her thoughts drifted to the life she had lived with Nathaniel, the way he would hold her close and smile at her. When they danced in the living room, she couldn't allow the things that had been done to him to slip from her mind. She was determined to not back down from this, even if it meant confronting Anderson and the other person accountable. Harper had made a self-promise the day she saw Nathaniel alive again that she would not lose him twice, but she was not sure how she would handle it at this point. Anderson was going to find out how wrong she had been if she thought she could ignore Harper. In the days ahead, Harper blended in with the background at the Riverside Hotel, trying not to draw attention to herself, but her thoughts were anything but tranquil. Following her experience with Nathaniel and the unsettling presence of Anderson, she was more determined than ever to find out the truth. It was now obvious to Harper that Anderson had a significant role in whatever had happened to Nathaniel, so if she wanted answers, she would have to learn more about her. Harper wasn't expecting to get her chance so quickly. One afternoon, she was tidying up in one of the back corridors. She slipped around a corner, her heart pounding as she heard Anderson's voice. Anderson, the hotel manager, was conversing quietly with another man. Harper acknowledged that they are watching out for interruptions. Anderson said, "Because Mr. Brooks follows a strict schedule, we cannot afford to be sidetracked." "Yes, that is recognized." "Anderson, miss." The manager shot back. "I'll make sure everything runs smoothly." Harper's thoughts were racing as they left. When she was close enough, she had to see what Anderson had in store. Maybe there was something she could hear that would alert her to Nathaniel's situation. She followed quietly, staying close to the shadows, until she noticed Anderson vanish into one of the smaller meeting rooms on the lower floor. Harper gave it some thought and decided to take a chance. She grabbed a cleaning cart from a nearby supply closet and used it as a cover to roll down the hallway in the direction of the meeting room. As she arrived at the door, she pressed her ear against the wood, straining to hear what was being spoken inside. According to Anderson, there is still a risk even when the medicines are working. He's starting to have epiphanies, to see glimpses of his past. If we don't give him a lot of attention, we'll go crazy. Harper's blood flowed with cold treatments. For what length of time and with what kind of therapy had they been providing Nathaniel? She struggled to breathe while she listened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Is there any way to modify the dosage?" a different voice asked. Harper was not familiar with this person, but he seemed uneasy, as if he didn't belong. With a trailing voice, Anderson shot out, "There's only so much we can do before doing irreparable harm. We've already taken a great deal of chances to bring him here. If we push him too far, he might break, in which case this whole ordeal won't have been worthwhile." Harper's hands were shaking as she took in everything she was hearing. It was evident that whatever they were doing was unsafe because they were controlling his thoughts and giving him drugs. She was shocked to learn that Nathaniel's memory loss wasn't typical, even though she had suspected as much. She was still baffled as to why they were deliberately keeping him in the dark in order to manipulate him. Harper's mind was already racing as the conversation continued. How could she continue to study these treatments without revealing Anderson's identity? She had to learn more about them and find out if they could be reversed. Footsteps from the opposite direction came up the corridor, drawing Harper's attention away from her thoughts. She hurriedly pulled the cart out of the way of the door, hoping no one would notice, and pretended to be cleaning. He glanced at her but remained silent when a man in a suit rounded the corner. Harper did not move, her heart pounding till he disappeared around the corner. She knew she wouldn't have much time left here. Though she'd heard enough, it was still too dangerous to proceed. She required to know exactly what treatments Nathaniel was getting and from whom. When her shift ended that night, when Harper got home, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She didn't want to risk drawing attention by asking about Nathaniel's condition at the hotel, so she decided to do her own investigation. She typed in a few keywords to see if anything could shed light on the kinds of memory suppression techniques Anderson had been talking about. She searched rapidly and came across articles about experimental remedies, items that, although seeming like science fiction, were apparently being explored behind closed doors by several different businesses. There were mentions of drugs that might suppress some memories, remove negative ones, or even create new ones. Harper felt a chill run down her spine as she read. Could this really be what they'd done to Nathaniel, erasing her from his mind, or, worse, erasing her memories and substituting them with new ones? When she dug deeper and found what she was looking for, her heart stopped. An article about the company named Marcus Anderson as CEO of a memory manipulation company with its offices in New York. Harper recognized the name immediately. Marcus Anderson was identified as the CEO in the publication, which meant that he was the same Anderson she'd seen at the hotel. It also showed affiliation with many prominent law firms, one of which Harper knew had ties to Nathaniel's family. Everything started to make sense. Now, Anderson was working with Nathaniel's family to take care of his belongings, and they were using these experimental treatments to keep him submissive. They had warped his memory, making him forget his past in order to maintain unrestricted control over the strings. Harper's stomach turned at the thought that they were controlling Nathaniel and had taken his life. Harper understood she would have to act fast if Anderson and her friends discovered Harper was spying on them. Even though they would stop at nothing to silence her, she could not just watch and do nothing. She needed to find a way to pull Nathaniel out of this so that he could remember who he was and the life they had built together. The next morning, Harper went back to work, her mind full of thoughts. She needed to be careful, but she was still determined as ever. She kept a safe distance from both Nathaniel and Anderson, watching and listening for any opportunity to learn more. Every time she saw Nathaniel, she felt a tinge of melancholy mixed with optimism. There had been brief moments, though he could never quite figure out why, when he seemed to recognize her. She had to imagine those memories remained underneath everything Anderson had done to him. As she was sleeping, Harper sipped her coffee outside the hotel and attempted to think of a strategy for what to do next. She had to find a way to approach Nathaniel more closely without drawing attention to herself so that she could talk to him alone. As she weighed her options, an audacious but perhaps fruitful idea began to form in her mind. If she could just manage to slip into the area that housed Nathaniel's treatment records, she might be able to find out exactly what they had been doing. She thought it was the best idea she had ever had, even though it looked unlikely to him, and if she could find proof of what they were doing, she could even use it to force Anderson's hand. Harper wasn't sure how much longer she had, but one thing was for sure: even though she was this close to winning Nathaniel back, she would not give up. She was willing to go to any lengths to help him recall. Harper watched closely and waited patiently over the next 3 days, trying to find out as much as she could without raising red flags. Every time she saw Nathaniel, she had to fight the urge to run to him, take him by the shoulders, and beg him to recall everything. But if she acted irresponsibly, she knew that would ruin any chance she had to solve this. This risky strategy was her only option. In order to oversee Nathaniel's medical treatment, Anderson and her team were using files, and she needed to figure out how to access them. She'd seen Anderson bring a briefcase into the conference room during one of their meetings, and she had a feeling it held important stuff. Details on the medications they were providing Nathaniel may be found in documents and notes. If she could get her hands on it, even for a little while, she might be able to find the proof she needed. Harper had been waiting for her chance, and one afternoon, while cleaning the hallway outside the conference room, she saw Anderson come out and pick up her phone. Harper walked quickly down the hallway, her expression solemn and determined, and Anderson didn't appear to notice. Harper's heart skipped a beat when she looked into the room and spotted the briefcase on the table, seemingly abandoned. Her time to seize the moment was over. Harper knew she didn't have much time left, but she couldn't let it slip away. She glanced to make sure no one was watching before sliding into the conference room and closing the door. Harper opened the briefcase that was directly in front of her and felt an adrenaline rush. She worked quickly, looking over the documents without considering how much time she had left. A variety of standard business documents, contracts, meeting agendas, and financial reports were buried among everything else. Under them, she found a large folder labeled Brooks Project Treatment Protocol. Harper's hands shook as she opened the folder and quickly perused the first few pages. When she read what she had, her blood ran cold. The books discussed several experimental treatments meant to alter cognitive processes and repress specific memories. Notes on dosing, timing, and other specifics were included, along with a list of potential side effects that varied from mild confusion to complete memory loss. When Harper discovered that Nathaniel had not only been drugged, but had also been subjected to methodical manipulation and had some aspects of his background removed from his memory, her stomach twisted over. She felt queasy reading the clinical, emotionless descriptions. Each word stabbed her in the same place. Especially, one page stood out of progress. There was discussion of a report that covered difficult-to-suppress permanent memory fragments. Harper's breath caught as she turned to face the next line. The subject appeared to be recalling prior associations with individuals who were particularly associated with HC, which could only be Harper Caldwell. They had known about her and had been trying to erase her from Nathaniel's mind. Harper was filled with rage. They had taken his memories, everything that made him unique, and now they were trying to erase her too. She wanted to scream and rip the papers to bits, but she pushed herself to be calm. She was required to preserve these records, but only if she removed them. Anderson would be the one to identify the issue. Harper quickly pulled out her phone and swiftly took a picture of each page, making sure to capture every last detail. She heard footsteps as she was ready to finish. Panic struck her as she hurriedly closed the briefcase and pushed it back into place. She'd just enough time to straighten up and tuck her phone in her pocket before the door opened and Anderson strode back in. Though Harper's heart was pounding, she pretended to rapidly clean off a nearby table, hoping Anderson wouldn't notice anything weird. "Why are you in here?" Anderson inquired, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Harper. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Harper pretended to smile tensely. "I was just cleaning up. I didn't realize someone would come back that soon." Anderson gave her a long look, as if he wasn't sure if he should trust her. Harper could feel the weight of that glance and hoped Anderson wouldn't catch her lying. Finally, Anderson gave a nod and her expression softened. "Verify that everything is in order, then simply leave." Saying something sharp, she moved to the briefcase and snapped its lid. Harper's pulse raced, knowing how close she'd been to being found, but she remained composed, nodding obediently as she gathered her things and left the room. Once she was secure and out of sight, Harper took her phone out of its hiding spot and browsed through her photos. She could demonstrate that Anderson and her allies had been deliberately suppressing Nathaniel's memories now that she had the proof. Though she was still perplexed, why had they gone to such lengths to contain him? What were they trying to hide? How and why was his family getting married? Harper understood that she needed help. Her ability to handle this on her own was insufficient, and if she wanted Nathaniel back, she would have to confront Anderson. She wanted a translator to explain these documents. Though she wasn't sure who to believe, she thought of reporting something to the police. As Harper went out of the supply closet and back into the foyer, her mind was racing with thoughts. She had to find someone who wasn't staying at the hotel and wasn't connected to either Nathaniel or Anderson's family. Maybe she could find a private investigator or perhaps a reporter. Someone who could help the detective decide what would be the best line of action. But as she approached the foyer, something halted her in her tracks. Nathaniel was standing close to the door, chatting with a man she didn't know. Harper could not help but note that, despite his casual attire and relaxed posture, there was tension in his expression. In an attempt to get a peek into their conversation, she slowed down. "I don't like how hard Anderson is pressing." The stranger was warning him that if he started to remember, everything may fall apart. He was speaking quietly but firmly. Nathaniel's response was more muted, but Harper could still understand what he was saying. She went on, "It's under control. We just need to wait." Harper's heart frozen. Was Nathaniel aware of the situation involving him? Was he complicit, or was he just repeating what he'd been told? She had no idea how much of what he said was true or based on his forced labor. Harper began to realize that she had to come out. She had to talk to him to find out the truth. She took a long breath, giving herself a minute to compose herself, and then she started heading toward Nathaniel and the other man. As they got closer, she saw that Nathaniel briefly looked at her. She caught what she thought was a flicker of recognition, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced with the same distant, guarded expression she'd seen earlier. "Harper," his voice was monotone, as if speaking her name were just another routine step. "Why are you here?" Nathaniel waved the man next to him off with a raised hand, but he seemed angry. She attempted to keep her voice steady as she replied, "I need to talk to you." "Everything is well," he said. "Give us a moment, please." Amid the hustle and bustle of hotel operations, Harper and Nathaniel found themselves in the lobby as the man paused, nodded, and turned away. Harper's pulse raced as she looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of the man she had known. "Please, Nathan." She spoke in a voice scarcely audible above a whisper. "I have to be aware of your current situation. I would like you to remember it." Harper stood before Nathaniel, her face pleading, and for a moment his icy, hard gaze came back. He surveyed the crowded foyer as if to see how much notice their conversation would get. Harper's heart sank, but she persisted in her stance and refused to back down. "Let's relocate to a quieter spot," said Nathaniel. Finally, he spoke something quiet. "Join me." He led her down a hallway to a small, vacant sitting area off from the mainstream of guests. Harper followed him, trying to prepare herself for whatever this meeting might involve, her heart pounding. The moment they entered the lounge, Nathaniel gave her a quick glance as his expression changed. Unreadable. "What is that?" "Would you like Harper?" he asked in a cold, detached tone. "I have no idea why you're behaving this way." Harper took a long breath to calm herself. "Even though I know you don't remember me, it's not your fault," she continued. "I'm trying to understand what's happened to you. Someone has done this to you. They have been manipulating your memories while in control of you." For an instant, Harper thought she saw a glimmer of doubt in Nathaniel's gaze, but it was gone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied. "No, you are mistaken. I am not." With emotion coursing through her voice, Harper insisted. "I looked over the files. Nathan, I know about the treatments. Anderson, your family. They've had you under their thumb, making you forget your past. Even though I have no understanding why they are doing this, I need your trust. For me, you have to believe that. I'm giving it to you straight." Nathaniel's expression hardened as he shook his head. "You don't understand," he said. His voice sharpened. "Right now, my family is keeping an eye on me. They are keeping an eye on my security." Harper repeated herself, doubtful. "Do you really believe that they are in charge of you? Nathaniel? They have taken away everything that made you who you are. How effective do you think that protection is?" For a brief moment, Harper thought Nathaniel would lash out at her, but all he did was give her a hopeless, resignation expression. Gently, he continued, "I'm not the person you're looking for. I have no idea who you think I am." Harper's heart broke at the words, but she refused to give up even though she could sense he was trying to push her away. "Nathaniel and I had a daughter together." She softened her voice and said, "I know you don't remember everything, but there has to be a part of you that recognizes me, even if it's just a little bit we were married. Are you really not feeling anything at all when you hear that?" Nathaniel hesitated for a brief period. Harper thought she saw something, a flash of recognition or sorrow. But he shook his head and the moment was gone. "I apologize," he murmured, barely audible above a whisper. "I don't remember." Harper's eyes watered, but she blinked them away. She didn't have the luxury of crying now that she was so near. "You don't have to apologize because it's not your fault," she said gently. "But you do need to acknowledge that there are individuals who are taking advantage of you. You have been taking therapies and prescription drugs to aid in your forgetting. I vouch for it." For the first time, she observed a hint of uncertainty as Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "What proof?" he asked. Harper pulled out her phone and looked over the photos she had taken of the documents in Anderson's briefcase with shaky palms. She handed Nathaniel the phone, her brow wrinkled, and watched as he looked through the photos. She watched as he flipped through the images, his eyes becoming increasingly confused and agitated. In response, he said, "This is untrue." Finally, his voice faltered. "That has to be. My family would not treat me like this. If only it weren't the case." Harper said a quiet phrase. "But it's not. They're taking advantage of you. Nathan. They're in control of your life, and they're trying to ruin what we have together. But you can fight against this." You can still picture Nathaniel holding the phone with his hands interlocked and his knuckles white. "She told him they were helping him," Anderson continued. "They misled you," he added, his voice shaking as he stated, "This is the only way to make things right. I've been through something traumatic." Harper stepped in closer and spoke. "Everything they told you was false. Please. Nathaniel, I need your confidence. I understand that it's confusing, but you have to quit putting up with their abuse of you." Harper noticed the tension and doubt that flared in Nathaniel's gaze. As the scenario replayed in his mind, she reached out and gently touched his arm in an attempt to comfort him. "I treasure you. It stays somewhere within you," she answered, her voice barely audible above a whisper. "I know you loved me too. That love didn't just vanish." Nathaniel closed his eyes and contorted his face in pain. He added in a wounded voice, "I don't know what to believe." He said, "I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Everything feels strange." "You are, in fact." "You don't have to anymore," Harper said, despite her deep sadness for him. "We can solve this jointly if you allow me to help." Before Nathaniel could respond, Harper's stomach clenched with dread as footsteps roared throughout the passage. She turned to see Anderson leaning toward her face, cold and unyielding. Instinctively, Harper leaned forward to shield Nathaniel from Anderson's intense gaze. "Why is this taking place?" Her eyes narrowing, Anderson commanded her to look between Harper and Nathaniel. "I think I was pretty clear when I said Mr. Brooks doesn't need any unnecessary distractions." Harper's pulse was pounding, but she was determined to persevere. "He deserves to know the truth," she uttered. She talked slowly. "You've been running his life, dominating him. That has to stop right away." Anderson's lips curled into a tense, sardonic smile. In response, she said, "You have no idea what you're talking about. Mr. Brooks is under my supervision, and everything we've done has been to his benefit. For his personal gain." Harper burst into fury and fired back. "You've been managing his funds, erasing his memories, and feeding him medicines. In what way does that benefit him?" An ominous gleam appears in Anderson's eyes. "You're overstepping, MZ Caldwell," she remarked. "I suggest you leave before you worsen things for yourself." Nathaniel's head shot up at that, horror and confusion illuminating his eyes. "What do you mean by this?" "Worsen the circumstances." With a wavering voice, he asked, "What are you going to do to her?" Harper could not help but notice the coldness in Anderson's eyes, even if she kept her expression calm. "Nothing," she said, "as long as she knows where she belongs. But this little outburst needs to end." Harper took a bold step forward, unflinching. "I'm going to stop you from hurting him because I know what you're doing," she proclaimed. "I'm not going anywhere." Nathaniel's strained, pallid face stared at Harper and Anderson for a moment. Harper was hoping he would help him sort through the layers of confusion that had been bothering him, but he shook his head. Harper could hardly hear him when he said, "I don't know what to do," and she started to get desperate. She could see that Nathaniel was struggling, torn between what he'd been taught to think and what she was trying to convince him was the reality. But before she could say anything more, Anderson took a step forward, his gaze unblinkingly cold. "Hardly, Mr. Brooks," she remarked. "Come with me now." Nathaniel hesitated a moment before turning back to look at Harper. She felt driven to rescue him from Anderson's hold because she could see the fear and confusion in his eyes. But he didn't move, and he turned around and followed Anderson down the hallway, leaving Harper to stand by herself in the empty living room, her heart blowing up again. Harper's heart was pounding as she watched Nathaniel and Anderson walk out of the deserted lounge. She was finally unable to break through the defenses that had been erected around his skull, despite the fact that she had been closer than ever before, but she was not going to quit up now. Not after she'd seen the flicker of doubt in his eyes, that small moment when he seemed to doubt everything he'd been taught. She really needed a new plan. Anderson was clearly holding Nathaniel closer, and if Harper didn't act fast, she might lose all hope of reaching him. As she stood there trying to focus, her phone buzzed in her pocket. When she pulled it out, she saw a message from an unknown number. "Come see me at the cafe across the street, 8 peak. We ought to talk to a friend." Harper's brow knitted. She didn't know the number, but she didn't feel comfortable with the message. Was that a ruse? A warning? Or was there someone else who knew what was going on? She hesitated for a while, then decided she had nothing left to lose. If people were willing to talk to her, she needed to find out what they knew. 8:00 p.m. Entering the small, dimly lit bistro across from the Riverside Hotel, Harper took a seat. There were only a few patrons scattered around, enjoying coffee and leafing through newspapers in the calm environment. Harper looked around the room in the hopes of seeing her mysterious friend, but she didn't see anyone she recognized. She heard a voice from over here just before she turned and left. Harper turned and spotted a man sitting at a corner booth, half of his face obscured by the shadows. She stayed for a while then. At his signal, she went to the booth and sat across from him. "You are the person you are." In an attempt to keep her cool, Harper asked, "Why did you come to our meeting?" The man leaned nearer, finally letting Harper get a favorable look at his face. He appeared to be in his mids, with a small beard and weary eyes, like someone who hadn't slept well in days. "My name is Marcus Anderson," he murmured. "Yes, I am. The brother of the woman you have been interacting with." Harper's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're related to her?" she inquired, hardly able to hide her surprise. "What makes you wish to assist me?" "I know what my sister has been doing to Nathaniel, and I can't watch it any longer," Marcus said, sighing as he combed his hair and said, "I'm sick of seeing my sister ruin people's lives." The therapies made Harper's heart skip a beat. She asked in a raised voice, "So why didn't you do anything to stop her?" Marcus hesitated for a brief instant. Harper thought he might turn and walk away. But after that, he spoke in a low, pained voice. "It's complex," he told Anderson. "My sister is connected to so many people. She's been able to cover her traces and make sure no one finds out. But she's pushing Nathaniel too far, and I'm concerned about what could happen if she keeps going." Harper leaned forward, her mind racing. "Why not? In what way is she trying to hurt him?" Marcus checked the cafe for anyone watching the treatments, which involve more than memory suppression. He said, "It's all about having control. Using a combination of medication and psychological training, she has been able to keep Nathaniel submissive by making sure he doesn't question her judgments. She's employed this tactic before, but never on such a well-known person." Harper felt a chill run down her spine. Why would she behave in that manner? Horrified, she wondered why she had to make such an effort to manage him. Marcus groaned again, and Harper saw the regret in his eyes. "It's all about the money," he continued. "Nathaniel's family had to make sure it stayed under their control because they possess a lot of it. After Nathaniel survived the plane crash, things were difficult. It was supposed to be his last time. But when he seemed to be alive, my sister saw an opening. Once she convinced the family that she could handle and control him, they gave her complete freedom to do as she pleased. Harper has been taken advantage of because she thought she was going to get sick, she asked, barely able to make sense of what she was hearing like a puppet. Yes, in fact. Marcus's voice was heavy with guilt. Anderson has always been adept at tricking people, but this time she's gone too far. I didn't think I could keep my distance from her after seeing what she'd done to Nathaniel. I can't keep quiet any longer. Harper's brain raced. Please help me stop her. Although she was aware that something awful was occurring, she was unaware of how serious it was. She spoke something, her voice shaking. I have to find a way to connect with Nathaniel so that he remembers who he truly is. Harper saw the unease in Marcus's eyes and his hesitancy. It wouldn't be easy, he said. She has had extensive conditioning, and the medications she takes are strong. But if you can get him to remember something, even a minor fact related to his identification, that might be enough to go past him. Feeling a surge of hope, Harper replied, I have to, nodding to Marcus. But there was sadness in his expression. Be careful, he said. If my sister discovers what you're doing, she won't hesitate to shut you down because she has a tendency to cause problems. Move on. As Harper took in what he had said, her heart raced. She cried, I don't give a damn. I'm not going to let her keep hurting him. Marcus gave her a long, hard look before removing a little vial from his pocket. He remarked, sliding it over the table. It interferes with a number of the drugs she has been giving him. It may help him organize, at least temporarily, if he agrees, but be careful. It won't go on forever, and as soon as she finds out more, she will step up the therapies. Hands shaking, Harper picked up the vial and looked inside. And that was all. She wanted to talk to Nathaniel now and help him break through the cloud of confusion that had been clouding his mind. She muttered something barely heard above a whisper. Thank you. I don't know how I could ever repay you. Just be careful that it's not her triumph. Marcus spoke, eyes dark and tired. That's all I'm asking for. Harper placed the vial into her pocket, fear and resolution buzzing in her mind. In this case, she had to use her cunning and timing just so. However, at least now she had a plan and wasn't on her own. She left the restaurant and stepped back out into the darkness. Harper experienced a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know what would happen, but one thing was for sure. She would not give up until she got Nathaniel back, whatever was required. She would make sure that Anderson's schemes were foiled, and she would make him remember. Harper returned to the Riverside Hotel early the next morning, her heart pounding as she held the small bottle in her pocket. Having not slept well the night before, her mind was buzzing with ideas about what Marcus had told her and what she needed to do next. She knew she didn't have much time. Anderson was dominating Nathaniel more and more, and Harper would lose him forever if she didn't move quickly. She had to timing it just right, slipping the counteragent to Nathaniel without drawing attention to herself. But it goes farther than that. Even for a few moments, she had to make sure he was in a secure place where he could unwind and let his guard down. Harper knew it was unlikely to work, but she had no other plan. When she started working her shift, Harper scanned her surroundings, hoping to spot Nathaniel. Her heart skipped a beat, seeing him emerge from the elevator with a concentrated, aloof look. Knowing that he was by himself, and that neither Anderson nor any of her friends would be around, Harper approached him warily. Nathaniel stopped and turned for a moment as she muttered something in a calm but anxious tone. He just stared at her, as if trying to make out what features she had. I must talk to you, even if it's just for a little bit. Nathaniel hesitated, scanning the lobby as if he expected Anderson to arrive at any moment. Harper could see the fight in his eyes, the struggle between the fragments of his past and the training that had been forced upon him. She moved forward and spoke something quietly. Her voice was kind but insistent as she stated, There's something I need you to see. It will be finished soon. I promise. When his expression wavered, Harper thought for a moment that Nathaniel would say no, but then he nodded almost imperceptibly. Harper led him to a small, off-the-mainstream of guests and staff members' private lounge area on the other side of the hotel, and he said quietly, Just a minute. Her heart pounded hard in her chest as she closed the door behind them. It was finally the moment she had been waiting for. This was something she had to do. She had to find a way to make him take the counteragent without attracting undue attention to herself. Now she took out the vial and held it out to him. She spoke with a slight tremor in her voice, which may help you remember saying, "I need you to trust me." Nathaniel frowned and carefully examined the vial. "What is that?" he asked, a note of suspicion in his voice. "It opposes you." In an attempt to seem calm and collected, Harper added that it can assist you in unwinding, even if only briefly. "I know this seems crazy, but you have to believe me. They have been using drugs to manipulate you so that you lose sight of your true identity. But if you agree with this, maybe you will be able to remember." Nathaniel's hands trembled as he took the vial and stared at it, as if it held the answers to all the questions he had ever been too afraid to ask. "Why would they expose me to this?" he said, his voice barely audible above a whisper. "I don't understand." His confusion and horror filled Harper's heart, but she also knew she could fight this and not have to let them win. Harper softly said, "They want to control you. They're afraid of what you might do if you remember who you really are." At last, Nathaniel lifted his head to meet hers. Harper saw a flash of determination in his eyes. "All right," he said, raising his voice a notch from before. "I'll see to it." He winked a little at the taste as he unscrewed the vial's cap and swallowed its contents. Harper eyed him nervously, hoping that the counteragent would work sufficiently to dispel the mental fog that had been impairing his eyesight. All she could do for a few moments was wait and pray that nothing would happen. Nathaniel just stood there, expressionless, and Harper felt a wave of horror course through her chest. What if it didn't work out? What if she wasn't correct? And there was no going back for him? Nathaniel staggered back, eyes progressively widening as he gripped his head as though in pain. With trembling hands, Harper raced to his side and reached out to stabilize him. "Hello, and how are you, Nathaniel?" she questioned frantically. "What's happening?" I... Uncertain. Nathaniel gasped and seemed to be breathing laboriously. "Flashes. I have visions, but they don't make sense." Harper stared in horror and relief as he struggled, his heart pounding. It was clear that the counteragent was in pain, but it was still working. She tried to comfort him by grasping his hands, but he became unbearably tight with her fingers. Harper spoke with a sudden tension in his voice. "I recall the way you laughed and cried at our wedding and again when Lila was born." As Harper listened to Everything Goes Dark, her heart burst with hope and her eyes welled up with tears. She claimed that this is the result of their robbing you of your memories. With gentleness. They stay where they are, nevertheless. You just have to never give up, Nathaniel. Nathaniel dropped to his knees, clutching his head as more memories flooded back, his expression turning sorrowful. His voice shattered. He whispered, "Why would they do this to me?" "What did you give, Nathaniel?" Anderson asked her savagely. "What the hell is going on here?" As the lounge door sprang open before Harper could respond. With her eyes focused on the empty vial in his fingers, she asked. Harper moved, to throw herself in front of Nathaniel and shield him from Anderson's rage despite her callous heart. "I gave him an opportunity to recall," was her response. "She has been resisting your attempts to take something away from him." Anderson's lips curled into a scowl. "You know what you're doing," she spat out. "You stupid girl." "He's gonna snap. This is too much for him to handle." "No," Harper said as she shook her head. "He's not going to give up. He is going to fight, and you are not going to stop him." Stepping closer, Anderson's eyes glinted with a deadly brightness, and her voice was cold. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she said. "You think that coming in here can easily reverse what we've done? Here, you don't feel at ease." Harper Nathaniel climbed to his feet, his face pale and wan, but his eyes unclouded. "No," he addressed Anderson. His tone was harsh yet unwavering. "You are the one who is overachieving." Looking back, now it all makes sense. For an instant, Anderson's eyes widened. She seemed really afraid. You don't understand, Nathaniel. I understand everything perfectly, he replied, cutting her off. I will not submit to your continued use of me as a tool for your dominance. She reached for the vial, her face twisted in wrath, and Nathaniel moved faster than Anderson. He grabbed her arm and pulled her back with a firm but steady grip. Hatred erupted in Anderson's eyes as she said, "It's over. You can't control me anymore." Despite her feelings, Anderson did not try to stop herself. Instead, she smiled a cold, dangerous smile that made Harper's back feel cold. She said, "You think this is finished? It's not. Nathaniel, you are mine, and I will not let you go, even when your memories come back." Harper saw the misery and tension between the past and present, reflected in Nathaniel's eyes as his countenance hardened. But then, he turned to face Harper, a gaze of pure love and resolution shining through. He calmly said, "If that's what it takes to protect Harper and Lila, then I'll end this myself." Harper was out of time to reply. Harper had no idea that Nathaniel had taken a tiny syringe out of Anderson's briefcase and used it to inject himself. Anderson's eyes widened in horror. "What are you doing if you could?" Nathaniel turned to look at Harper, grief and love in his eyes. With a trailing, "I'm sorry, but I won't let them hurt you again," Harper was left to catch him, her screams echoing through the deserted room. Harper clutched Nathaniel in her arms and watched the life drain from his eyes. She cried out for help, but she knew it would be too late. Her heart ached. The injection had done its job. Nathaniel's corpse lay limp. When Anderson realized what had happened, her face turned pale with shock, and she stood there breathing weakly and erratically. "Nathan, please," Harper whispered. "You have to stay with us," she said, her tears streaming down her cheeks. "You have to stay with me. Don't do this." Nathaniel's eyes could not quite meet hers in the dimness. He reached up and gently wiped her tears from her face with trepidation. He mumbled in a barely audible voice, "I apologize. Although I didn't want to end that way, I couldn't do anything more to keep you safe." Harper wanted nothing more than to keep him near her heart, so she clamped her palm around his. "We could have battled this together," she remarked. Her grief muffled her speech. "How come you didn't have to do this?" "Since I can remember now?" Nathaniel said he was having respiratory difficulties. "I remember every single detail. I knew what they had planned, so I couldn't let them take back control. If I vanished, they would have no power over you, Lila, or me anymore." Harper struggled to hear her, hanging on to every syllable even as her sobs grew louder. "I love you," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "You have my undying love. Nathan, not even for a single day." Nathaniel's mouth curled into a feeble smile. He let out a loud, "I love you too." His eyes gleamed with tears as he reassured Harper, "I always will. Even when I'm not here, I'll be with you." Harper experienced a wave of panic as his breathing grew more rapid. "Don't leave me, please." Nathaniel's hand shifted from her cheek to his side in spite of her cries. He closed his eyes, let out a short breath, and vanished. Harper felt everything around her crumble. She held Nathaniel's body close, soaking his shirt in tears, and rocked back and forth, unable to accept that he was truly gone. The man she had loved and dedicated her life to saving had sacrificed his life to protect her. Her last minutes were brutal and painful, and she didn't know how she would live without him. Still, even in her grief, though Harper's mind was still clear enough, she could not let Anderson get away with what she had done and realized that she posed a threat. With a mixture of anguish and wrath burning in her eyes, Harper gazed up at Anderson, who was now scuttling toward the door in an attempt to avoid being noticed. "You're not gonna vanish." Harper's voice was cold and unyielding. "It was you and your crafty plans that made this happen. You must now make up for all that he gave you." Anderson's eyes flashed with fear, but they were quickly erased by her usual arrogance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said as she tried to get her composure back. "This choice was made by him. He caused this to happen to himself." "No," Harper said as she shook her head. "He acted because you left him with no other choice. Since you made him do this, you will pay for your actions." She quickly pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and gave the operator the details she needed. Then she went on. Everything is finished, even the therapy and medicine, and I have all the proof I require to destroy you. Anderson lost his composure for the first time. Harper could see that she was truly afraid. With a quivering voice, she whispered, "You're not understanding. This involves some larger-than-life characters. If you do this, you are putting yourself at risk. You are putting your daughter at risk." Harper refused to give up, even as the thought of Lila made her heart race. "I'm not concerned about it." She continued, saying that it's my time now, that Nathaniel has done everything he could to keep us safe. I swear that I will never again permit you or anybody else to hurt my family. The sound of approaching sirens echoed across the hallway, and Anderson's face became pale as she realized there was no way out. She tried to get away, but Harper blocked her path and would not let her get away. "Again," she said in a harsh tone, "it's over. You are going to be responsible for what you do." The police showed up in a matter of minutes, and in spite of Anderson's protests, she was taken into custody. As Harper watched herself being led away in handcuffs, she experienced a strange sense of emptiness. She had won, even though it didn't seem like a victory. She had lost Nathaniel, and justice was never going to make that right. When the emergency personnel arrived and took Nathaniel's body away, Harper experienced a broken and empty feeling, as though a part of her had been ripped away. She wanted to scream, to cry bitter tears at how cruel life is. But she knew she had to be strong for Lilia's sake. She could not miss the sacrifice that Nathaniel had made. The days passed surprisingly quickly for Harper, who found herself going through the motions of existence, not sure where to begin. She said goodbye to the man she loved again and attended Nathaniel's small private funeral. Even though it hurt just as much as it did the last time, she knew she had to keep going. She owed Nathaniel an opportunity to start over, one that she had to seize. A couple weeks after the funeral, Harper got a package in the mail. There was no return address included, but when she opened it, inside was a note written in Nathaniel's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the page, and tears clouded her eyes as she began to read Harper. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there to say goodbye, but this means I'm moving on if you're reading this. Even though I wish things had gone differently, I want you to know that I feel at ease knowing Lila and you are safe. I've made arrangements to see to it that you don't have to worry about anything. I hope Lila can live the life I have always wanted for her because of the trust I have placed in her future. I'm sad I couldn't be there to see her grow, but I know you'll take excellent care of her. You've always been the strongest person I know, so I hope you can find the courage to keep going and discover happiness once more. I admire you, Harper. Please don't let my recollections cause you any trouble more than I can say. Be a constant reminder of my love and protection for you. That love will always be there for me, wherever I go. Perpetually yours." Nathaniel Harper's tears warped the words, but she read the letter out loud several times, holding it to her bosom as the feelings she had been suppressing suddenly surfaced. Nathaniel had tried everything, even in his final hours, to make sure she and Lila would be okay. It was this kind of selfless adoration that had first drawn her to him and eventually came to define him. Her tears were being wiped. Harper felt a strange peace descend upon her. Nathaniel was no longer with her, but his love still gave her direction and the will to carry on. Rather than be a source of grief, she would cherish his memory as a beacon of hope. She would live a joyful and loving life, as he would have wanted, in remembrance of the chance he had given her to start over. So she held Nathaniel's letter in her hand and his love in her heart. Harper looked forward, eager to begin a new chapter, knowing that no matter what happened, she would never be totally alone.